Hello, and welcome to another instructional video from Hit the Books podcast. I'm your host, Chris Holcomb, and today I'll be showing you how to affordably and safely frame and display your comic book collection. I've seen many methods of doing so, and certainly there's some subjective aspects to framing things to your personal taste. However, time and again, I've seen my fellow comic book collectors make the same mistakes, paying exorbitant prices for custom frames and custom matting and custom cabinetry that simply isn't necessary. I've also seen many display and framing mistakes that directly led to comic book damage and devaluation, including comics that were already sealed and rated. You'll need some cheap, sturdy, certificate-sized frames. You'll need some acid-free, textured cardboard stock, about 8.5 by 11 inches, which is your typical printer paper size and certificate size. You'll need some Scotch tape. And of course, you'll need some space on your wall where you can safely frame and hang your comic books. In my experience, dollar stores such as Dollar Tree or Dollar General typically have the best and cheapest options for frames. They usually have a little bit of a variety, so you can pick something closer to your personal tastes. And they are a little bit fragile, but they still have glass exteriors, which is very, very important to making this look like a high-quality frame job. You will need to make sure that you pick up standard certificate-sized frames. This is typically like your printer paper size, 8.5 by 11 inches. This makes matting a breeze, and that textured cardboard stock very easy to insert without having to do extra trimming and cutting. Go to your local big department store or to your favorite hobby store of choice and go to the paper section. Here, you're going to search for cardboard textured stock that is acid-free of the same size. You can get it a little bit bigger, but you don't want to get it any smaller. You can always trim it down to size if you need to. It's really easy to find, and the standard is typically the 8.5 by 11 size. I personally prefer the subtlety and the presentation of black canvas textured cardboard stock. There's different types out there. You can get stars and circles and triangles and stripes and chevrons, but I think the canvas looks the most natural and most like a professional matted feature. The texture makes the display a little bit more natural and professional looking and helps to keep the comic in place. Remember, this is very important. Before going any further in this process, make sure that your comics are properly bagged, boarded, and sealed. If you don't know what that means, or if you don't know how to do it, be sure to check out our other instructional video here on Hit the Books Instructionals. I'll put the link down in the description for your convenience. This will ensure that your comic is preserved and protected from all the elements and that you won't receive any kind of comic book damage or devaluation in this framing and displaying process. So before we jump into the actual process of framing and boarding your comic, let me run you through some quick tips that'll help you to avoid mistakes that even veteran comic collectors make when they're displaying and framing their comic books. First, avoid direct light, specifically any kind of direct intense light like a showcase light, a pointed desk lamp, or sunlight. Sunlight is particularly strong and especially damaging to a comic book. You can have a comic book go from vivid, bright, and colorful to just gray, dry, and drab and yellowed within hours of intense direct sunlight, especially for people located closer to the equator. So anytime you have light shining on your comic books, you want it to be kind of an indirect point of view. Something like a living room light or any kind of overhead lights need to be pointed down and away from the comic as opposed to down and towards the comic. So any kind of light that you use to showcase your comic books and to view them, you want to make sure it's limited. And you don't want to unnecessarily leave those lights on when you don't need to. For example, if you have your comics displayed in your entertainment cave or what have you, you don't want to leave those showcase lights on all the time, even if they are indirect. because that pigment over time will start to fade and break down because of the radiation from that light, from the photons being absorbed into that pigment molecule. So make sure that you are minimizing light exposure, especially sunlight and especially direct light from lamps and show lights. You do not want to put these near a window if you can avoid it, and if you do, make sure that there is some kind of blind or shade or some kind of way to deflect that light away from the comic books themselves. I have some blinds here next to these comics in particular, and I always angle them so that they are looped and point the light towards the opposite direction. So these comics, even at the crest of the day, are never exposed to direct sunlight. They might get reflected off the materials over there on the opposite side of the room and towards them, but the exposure will be significantly less, and your comics will not degrade and will not experience the same kind of devaluation that they might have if you were putting them directly next to a window with no protection and no reflection. Having those white boards and that reflective polyurethane protectant also helps to protect your comics from this direct light and indirect light and any kind of pigment breakdown. This is also true of those sealed and rated comics. This is the biggest thing that always screws up your wonderful, expensively rated comics. It's not a cheap process to get those classic comics rated and preserved and sealed at that specific rating of a 8.5 or a 9.0 or whatever you may have. If a comic collector sees your rating as a 9.0 and they see a clearly faded and damaged comic, they are not going to purchase it at the valued price because that rating is no longer valid because you have exposed that comic to some kind of direct light source that broke down the pigmentation. So that is always the most important thing. Avoid direct light. Another thing, you're going to want to make sure that everything is secured properly. If you're not familiar with hanging things on a wall or using studs in your wall or any kind of strong reinforced plastic nails that cover the regular nail, get some kind of handy friend or look up a YouTube video to help you out. I have brick walls here. I was able to drill directly into the brick themselves with some really strong bits and make some really strong and sturdy supports for all of these comics. Now, these comics are just your regular size comics, and the frames, thanks to being from the dollar store, are pretty light and easy to manipulate, and you really don't need much to help keep these comics in place. I could hang these on some drywall without any stud support and still be perfectly fine. But to be extra safe, you want to use some kind of fastener to help secure these things a little bit better, and that way your comics aren't going to fall off the wall. You also want to make sure that you secure these comics inside of the frame using that textured matted paper and using maybe a little bit of Scotch tape, as I'll show you in the process. This makes sure that if your comic does, for some reason, fall off the wall or fall off your display, whether it's a small earthquake or something that knocks it down, or some kids are running around, jumping around and shake the house, you have a way to protect those comics from extra damage should it fall off the wall. The frame might break, the glass might crack or fall apart, but your comic will be safe and sound as long as it's secured properly. Okay, this is very, very crucial to making sure that your comics don't get damaged in any sort of accident. And having these cheap comics frames has that added benefit of being easily breakable. So if you imagine like a modern car, they have all these little dead zones in the design that crumple when you get into an accident. Now, it looks horrible, but what it does, it absorbs a lot of that force that you would obviously be absorbing instead if it didn't have that crumple zone. So it's just simple physics, a simple way to protect your comics a little bit extra and ensure that you have a little bit of insurance in case something goes wrong, a stud comes loose, or somebody knocks your frame off the wall. So just some quick, important tips that'll help make sure that your comic books aren't damaged or devalued when you're displaying them and framing them. I think I've covered all of our bases, so let's get into it. So here you see all the materials you're going to need for a basic frame. You have your cheap certificate frame, your cardboard stock, acid-free of course. your bag and boarded comic book, and your Scotch tape. So you're going to take this cover. I've already taken off the little polyurethane, plastic covering on it. And you're going to flip it around and check. On these cheaper ones, they have, some sort of cheap cardboard back, but that doesn't matter because you're never going to see it. And they have these little bendable tabs. You want to be careful with these tabs because if you force them, they can break, and then you're out the dollar you spent because you'll need to get a new one or find another way to secure the back of the board. As you can see here, I was a little bit too aggressive with that bottom tab and it broke off. But I'm not going to be keeping this comic in this particular frame for long term. It's just for demonstration purposes. So you're going to bend all these little tabs up. Again, being careful not to break them like I did on the bottom there. And pull out that little cover. Pull out the little certificate sheet. You don't need it. It's just garbage. Go ahead and recycle it or throw it away, whatever you choose. Now, I make a good practice of getting a little microfiber cloth and just wiping off the interior of this glass. Once you mounted the comic in there and displayed it and everything, you really aren't going to want to take it all apart again just to clean the interior because you missed some speck of dust or you got a finger smudge in there or some other kind of thing. So try to avoid touching the interior there. Now, take your cardboard stock. This is textured acid-free cardboard stock. As you can see, there's a little bit of canvas texturing on this side. I don't know if you can see it with that focus. So turn it over, and then the other side is usually smooth. You want the canvas side facing forward. It helps to hold the comic in place a little bit and gives the frame job a very nice matted-looking aesthetic. And that's the goal, really, just to make this really well framed and well matted in a way that looks very good, even if it's affordable and cheap and completely reasonable to explain to your significant other when you're looking over the budget for that month. So here I'm just testing the paper to make sure that it is the proper size. As you can imagine with these cheap frames, sometimes the frames aren't quite the size they're advertised as. But this looks good. I'm not going to have to trim down the paper at all. Now I'm just going to start eyeballing it and trying to figure out where is center in this picture. I use my fingernail length on each side to kind of get a rough estimate at the center, at the bottom, and at the top, just to see if I'm roughly in the center. Now you can be much more meticulous about this if you wish to be. You can get out a ruler and really take some time to measure this out and make sure that your dimensions are good. It looks pretty good to me, so now I'm going to secure it in place. I'm going to get a little bit of Scotch tape. I'm going to roll it into a circle. Just the basic circle, make the sticky side on one side. You can get some double-sided tape, but you don't need to waste your money on special things like that. Roll it so that there's a little bit of the tab exposed, and then fold that tab into the interior and press it together. That little bit of sticky tab will help keep that together so it's not bubbling up or making a circle. So you want it as flat as possible, and now you have some very cheap, very improvised double-sided tape to help secure your picture and your comic. Again, you have the matted contouring in there that'll help you to keep this comic in place, so you really don't have to worry about any kind of shifting once it's secured inside the frame. The tape is just a little bit extra to make sure it doesn't move too much when you're placing it in the glass. So everything's set up the way I wish it to be. It's a little bit from the bottom, a little bit from the top, and about a fingernail's length from each side. I'm going to give it one quick wipe down, make sure I didn't miss any smudges or dust that might have accumulated on it. And I'm going to flip this over and mount it. You want to keep track of where the top of the comic is because when you put that cardboard backing back on, you're going to want to put it on in a specific fashion. And the less number of times you have to flip those little tabs and bend those little tabs, the better, because it'll last a little longer. For this purpose, I'm just bending it lightly, not pressing it too hard. Just bending it lightly to secure it in place so I can look at it and make sure before I put that cardboard backing on that the top is in the proper place. As you can see, it's secure there, And now I can look at my cardboard. You can tell which side's the top based on where the metal tab is, and that's where you're going to hang it on your nail or your screw or your stud. I flip it over, and of course there's a little paper here. Let's get that out of the way. As you can see, I have the comic framed in this particular position, fairly centered in a way that I find reasonable and to my taste. And now I can properly put this board in on the back. And I'm just going to lightly and carefully pull up these tabs, bend them a little bit, and place this board in place. Again, these are dollar frames. They are not meant to be super sturdy, so you got to handle them carefully initially. But then once they're on the wall, they look just as good as any other frame, and you can't tell the cheap materials in the back because you can't see them. So really, it's going to save you a ton of money. You're not going to be spending hundreds of dollars on expensive custom frames and cabinets and display pieces and shadow boxes. And there you can see it's well secured. Normally, I would obviously have the bottom one secured on there, but you could remedy that with some tape or something if you didn't want to go buy another one. And you pull this tab out just a little bit so that you'll be able to hang it up. And as you can see, you have a perfectly framed and matted comic that you can display on your wall. I have this little silver aesthetic because I thought it was cool, and I figured I'd pick that one up over the regular black one or the rounded one. And I give it one last wipe down with the microfiber cloth, and I gotta say, that's a handsome looking Doctor Strange on a handsome looking comic. Thank you for watching this Hit the Books instructional video. Be sure to hit like and subscribe down below. It really does help us out. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, be sure to go down in the comment section and send them our way. You can also hit us up on Twitter at HTBvids and on Facebook at /hitthebooks, all one word. You can also go to our webpage, www.htbvids.com, where you'll find buttons to all of our feeds and our podcast stations and our YouTube channel right there on the homepage. Just click the button there for your convenience and check it out. There's a bunch more content on the site too, and no advertisements that'll give your computer a weird virus or anything. So feel free to check out the website. It really is a convenient resource. If you'd like to help support this channel further, consider visiting our Patreon page at patreon.com/hitthebooks. All one word. You can contribute as little as $1 a month, and it really would go a long way to helping us out and keep content coming at a brisk pace. Remember, there's no obligation, and if you can't or don't want to contribute, we're more than happy to have you here as a viewer and as part of the community. So please keep watching and keep enjoying. We love having you around. Once again, I want to thank you for watching this episode, and be sure to tune in for the next instructional video and any future podcasts or content on the channel. See you next time.